Have you ever been accused of assigning busy work, or have your students say, "This is just busy work. What's even the point?" Maybe not to your face, but to each other. You ever had a student complain, "How can one weekly quiz cause me to fail?" Well, we all know the answer is that you failed like 10 others, but the idea of a quiz being weighted too much for grading, well, that's the point of this video. We're going to talk about how do we approach developing and creating intentional, high-impact teaching practices, assignments, activities, things like that. I want you to imagine for a moment that you are a graduate student pursuing your master's degree, and maybe you've had a similar experience to this, but your teacher assigns you a crossword puzzle with 50 definitions on it that's worth 10 points out of 1,000, and that's your homework for the night. One, you might be like, what the heck? I'm a graduate student. Why am I doing crossword puzzles? Two, maybe it's a little bit of a creative way to study some definitions, but there's some major issues with how that was assigned. And this is what happened to me. I go, a crossword puzzle. This is just dumb, busy work. I've already made flashcards for all those definitions. I don't need to do a crossword puzzle, yet alone a crossword puzzle that is 1% of my final grade, which makes me say, well, can I just do 50 crossword puzzles or 100 crossword puzzles, that will give me 100%? I'll do that this week. Give me 100 crossword puzzles. Done. Two issues potentially were happening here. One is that maybe this was a really valuable assignment, but the instructor did not articulate it or could not articulate why it was important. And so even a little bit of articulation about why we are doing and assigning the things that we're doing will save you those accusations and allow students to see the meaning behind it. Or two, we fall into this trap of assigning things and doing things because that's what was done before us. We take over teaching a course, we get the past syllabi, and we just go with it. Or maybe we do the assignments that our mentor assigned to us, or the lab activities that our mentor had and used for us, without ever being like, is this meeting our learning goals? Is this meeting the needs of my current students? And without being intentional about it. So I want to break down exactly how we kind of take a nice bird's eye view of our curriculum and our assignments and determine what is high impact and what is not, and how can we tweak the things in our class to, one, correspond to their impact to learning and contribution to the course, but two, actually be high impact, and three, maybe even take stuff out of your course and save you time grading. Those are all the goals and everything we'll cover in this video. All right, let's dive into determining and identifying and creating high-impact teaching practices, and even doing a nice course overview of what to keep in your course and maybe what to cut, right? We don't want you to burn out. We don't want your students to burn out. So that's really the goal here. The first thing I'd like you to do is actually list out, sit down, take 5-10 minutes, pull out a syllabi, and list out everything that you do in your course. So for example, maybe you have weekly quizzes, exams, maybe you have attendance that you take, you do weekly homework, and you assign reading. So for the example in this video, these are the 5 things that we incorporate into our class. Now, you could have a really big list, right? And you could get as granular as you want, everything from lectures to readings to anything, journaling, discussion boards. Write it all down. That's what is important here. So once we have this all written down, there's 2 terms that I want us all to be familiar with. We want to understand how these activities should play into the overall goal of meeting the student learning objectives and determining a student's grade. And so what we have is we have two types of assessments in a class. We have formative assessments, and you might have heard this term before, but a formative assessment is a type of assessment that really contributes and develops a student's learning or understanding of the course content. The point of it, if you were to say, what is the point of this assignment? It might be to help students master the material, to help them learn the material. That is a formative type of assessment or formative type of activity. It is forming the understanding of the students. On the opposite side of this, we have summative. And this is an evaluation or quantification of the learning that the student has done or application of the content. So we actually want to assess, determine what the student knows. These are summative. Now, when we have these two different types, we want to incorporate them into our classes a little bit differently. Ideally, we'd have a series of formative type activities, practices, assignments leading into some sort of summative, cumulative, or kind of tying a bow on that unit type assignment or project or exam. So we want to have multiple formatives leading into a summative. So what you want to do here, and what I'd like you to do, is take each of your practices and activities and determine, is it summative or formative? So, for example, the weekly quizzes that you see on your screen, perhaps in this example, I want to know how much of the weekly content students retained or understood. So what we did is it is a summative assessment for that week's material. So I put an S next to it. So if you've written down all your practices and activities, go ahead and put S's and F's next to them to determine whether they're summative or formative. Now, the way we incorporate this into the overall structure of a class, the thing about learning is no one is perfect at it from the start, right? That's learning. If you are good at it, you're lucky, right? Learning takes trial and error. So the formative assessments need to be an opportunity where students can fail safely. Failing is part of the learning process. If you dive into learning research, learning occurs in two ways. First, the information has to come in. So there has to be an intake part. And that is familiarization. That is you assigning readings, lectures, watching videos, students listening to you, even taking notes. These are all input type of learning activities where it really hones in on a student's familiarization with the content. Not even necessarily understanding, but it becomes familiar. They remember it. It's really rote memorization. The next part, to really solidify understanding and reach higher levels of learning, the brain actually has to output it. So the brain needs to take that information and apply it, to do something with it, to really just wrangle it out of there. And so you probably heard students say, I studied, I read the book, I watched all the videos, and I really understood it. But then I took the test and I failed. I got in and I don't know what happened. I call this the student learning fallacy. And it's this idea that they are familiar with your material, right? Which is good. They should listen to your lectures and understand it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be a good teacher, right? So all the material presented by professionals should make sense. But students often think, oh, that's me having learned it. So formative assessments are these ways to get that material out, to really give students the opportunity to pull it out. So it needs to be a safe experience. So we generally recommend that formative assessments have low to no point value or grade contribution. Now, the big argument here is, well, if there's no grade, they're not going to do it. Well, you teach adults. Like, they need to make their decisions, and when it comes to the test, they will quickly realize that, maybe I should have done those things. And if not, they've got to realize it at some point. And I get all these talks about not hand-holding them and stuff like this, but yet we want to nickel and dime them with assignments and points and grading everything. So which is it? It's okay if things are low points or no points or revisions are allowed. That's formative learning process. That is getting your students to meeting the learning goals and outcomes. So a summative assessment should have high point value or strong grade contribution. It should be a very large determining factor because it's ultimately assessing, did they meet their student learning outcomes or not? So we want to grade and assign grades based on these things. So now that we have an idea of maybe how we will weight these things, let's go ahead and see how they fit into the overall structure of the course. So we want to measure each of our practices and activities' contribution to learning. So that's kind of the criteria that we're going off of when we think of high and low impact practices, is how much contribution to learning does this have? And the way we are going to actually assess this is using a 2x2 contingency table like you see on the screen. For the columns, we're going to have high impact on the left and low impact on the right. And for the rows, we're going to have mandatory on top, optional on the bottom. So the top left square would be something that is in your course, it's mandatory, you really have to include it, there's no getting around it, and it's high impact. Something that is low impact and mandatory, for example, I consider this to kind of be, some people consider this to be attendance, I should say. Taking attendance maybe is optional, maybe not. We could argue on the internet for days on end about it, but some would say it's fairly low impact, or maybe some would say it's high impact. Coming to class gets it. You get the idea. Based on you and your learning goals in your class, you're going to take each of these things and assign them to one of these 4 quadrants. So for example of those weekly quizzes, well, they're fairly low impact, right? Summative assessments are going to be kind of low impact to the contribution of learning just in their base form. Now they can be tweaked to be switched over to high impact, but in general, because it's not formative, it's not helping them learn, it's more assessing it, it's going to be kind of low impact to the contribution of learning, and you don't have to do weekly quizzes, so this one would be optional. So go ahead and try to assign each of these to one of the 4 quadrants. Now, once we are in these 4 quadrants, there's a few things we can do. Anything in that bottom left quadrant where you see weekly quizzes and homework, where it's optional and low impact, you should find a way to either change those or get rid of them. It's not contributing to learning, and there's no reason it needs to be in your course. So take work off of your plate. This also leans into the Pareto principle, where it says that 80% of the learning is coming from 20% of the things you do. So let's really hone in on those things in the low impact category, especially optional. So bottom right, get rid of them or change them. That should be your guidepost. Top left, high impact and mandatory, absolutely keep. Lean into those. How can you make those even more effective? The time and energy that you took by eliminating the things that are low impact and optional, could you put it into those high impact mandatory practices? That's kind of where we want to be. Now, obviously, there will be some low impact mandatory things that we have to do, and there might be some high impact optional things, and that's great too. But this really helps you understand your course and where your materials fall. So let's go with that weekly quizzes. And let's say I ask you, well, why do you give weekly quizzes? And you say, oh, Dustin, I don't know. Like, I thought we just need to. Like, why else will students read? They won't do their readings if I don't do weekly quizzes. Well, they're adults. They can make that choice. But 2, so you don't really know what or why you're doing weekly quizzes. You've just done them because. And so you ask yourself, or I would ask you, well, is it really important that you test them on their material? Do you care? Does it help them meet their learning objectives by testing them on their material every week? And you might say, no, it's really more for them, right? The weekly quizzes help them review. Okay, so it's formative. If it's for them, it's formative. So we have the weekly quizzes. Let's change those to formative and see what happens, how we can do this. So we just changed those to formative. Now, they're still kind of low impact because it's just a quiz, you get a score, and la-da-da. So how can we change our weekly quizzes to make them more high impact? Some of the things I like to do is I like to give them a shot at taking it 3 times. 1, 2, 3. So now they're getting repeated chances. It causes them to study, review their material. So that is one way. Another way that you can make them is increase the time. Let them dive into their notes. Let them talk to the person next to them. Again, it's for them. You're tricking them into studying by saying, I don't care if you talk to the person next to you on this quizzes. Again, it's not for you. It's not for their grades. So we're going to lower the point value of it. And if they get it, great. And if they work together and talk and discuss your content, they are talking about your content during their own free time. It's what you want. And so another way that I do this is I set a expectations marker. You have to hit an 8 out of 10 on one of your 3. If you hit an 8 out of 10 on one of your 3, you get full points for all of it. Awesome. So again, low stakes. It's for them to learn the material. And so now that I've made those tweaks, this has actually become a really high impact practice for my students where I actually see quiz grades correlate to exam grades down the road. So an exam in itself, maybe low impact. How can you tweak it to make it more high impact to actually learning? So it could be a summative assessment that's also has high impact to their learning process. And there are ways to do that. And I don't want to take too much time in your video here with those things. So I hope this process helps you to determine and take a critical eye to your course in hopes of 2 things: increasing student learning and 2, taking work off of your plate. We're all busy. There's no reason to be doing things that are low impact and optional. There's no time for that. We don't have time for that. So invest in yourself by taking a little bit of time, doing this little activity. And if you want a more in-depth version of this activity where I really help you break everything down, assign things, and give you tips on exactly how to change it, check out my course mapping training on Epic Higher Ed. I'll talk a bit more about it here in a moment. But I'd love to hear how this goes for you. Did you make any tweaks? Did you eliminate anything? I want to know. Tell me in the comments below. I challenge you to take something out of your course or tweak it to make it more impactful. Let me know what that is in the comments below. So as we go through this video, it is actually a scaled down version of some of the information and a section of my course mapping training that is available at epichighered.com, where I help you build out a course map, and not only build out a course map to keep you and your students on track, but help you develop a high impact teaching playbook. So where you actually walk through your course, decide what is good, what is bad, how to tweak things, and potentially save you a ton of time and increase your students' learning. So if you like this video and you want to go deeper, head on over to Epic Higher Ed. I'll have the link in the description below. I want to take a moment and say thank you so much for being part of this Epic Higher Ed community. Thank you for valuing being a compassionate instructor. And I just want to ask for your support in doing this. Leave a like on the video if you found it helpful. Leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. I really love having you here. I love hearing how this stuff helps, and it helps me to continue to do this. So please like and subscribe. As silly as it feels saying that, it really means a lot to me. If you're interested in more videos, I have a couple videos up here on the screen for you to check out. Or maybe they're over here. I'm backwards tonight. But I hope you enjoyed those videos. We'll see you next time.